Okay, so Canada, right. Everyone thinks it's all like maple syrup and politeness.
Happy, happy, happy.
Exactly.
Have you ever heard a voice like this? What if I told you it's not human? It's completely generated by Google AI. Google's Notebook LLM, I made a video on this about 3 months back that how it is simplifying note taking. However, the recent update is even breathtaking. Here, my YouTube video, all I had to do was share the link on Notebook LLM and it has converted this into a podcast. I leave the podcast for you to hear to believe how realistic they have made this happen.
Okay, so Canada, right. Everyone thinks it's all like maple syrup and politeness.
Happy, happy, happy.
Exactly. But this YouTube video I found gets real about the immigrant experience. And, spoiler alert, it's complicated.
Oh, yeah, because it's not all just like one big melting pot. This video breaks down how different groups, they experience it all totally differently, like a refugee's experience versus someone who, shows up with a bunch of degrees. Worlds apart.
Right, and that's what I thought was so smart. They focus on three main groups: refugees and people seeking asylum. Then you've got your skilled tradespeople, and then your like white-collar skilled workers.
Because you got to figure the challenges are going to hit different depending on where you're starting from.
Totally. So imagine, right, you're fleeing some awful situation. Maybe you've got nothing but the clothes on your back. The video talks about this gratitude factor, that even though life in Canada might still be
Dignity of labor thing.
which is so interesting because it ties directly to happiness. If you're coming from a place where your skills are kind of looked down on, then you come to Canada and you're treated well, paid fairly, can build a good life.
That changes everything.
For sure. The video had this one guy who was a welder, barely scraping by back home. Now he owns a house, his kids are in good schools. It's amazing. But then the video takes this kind of turn. Starts talking about the skilled workers, the ones who were like doctors and lawyers back home.
And this is where it gets really interesting. Because for them, it's like this expectation gap, right? Imagine you're a surgeon at the top of your game back home.
You expect to just like slide right into that same life here.
Exactly. But then they hit this wall. Canadian experience, having to redo their certifications. It's a huge reality check.
That's going to be so demoralizing. The video had this woman, she was a software engineer, leading teams in India, the whole 9 yards. Gets here, can't even get an interview for like months.
It's rough. Because that feeling of like, wait, I'm not who I thought I was, that messes with your whole sense of self,
Totally. And then there's this catch-22, right? You need Canadian experience to get a job, but how do you get experience if no one will hire you?
Exactly. It's like the video had this example, a lawyer, super qualified, but they tell her she needs Canadian experience to even get an entry-level job.
Oh, wow. So what do people do? The video talked about these survival jobs, and I gotta say, that sounds kind of scary.
It's a real thing, unfortunately. Like, imagine going from being a professor to driving a taxi just to pay the bills. The video had a whole story about that.
Man, the mental toll that must take. It's like you come here for a better life, but you're just grinding away, feeling stuck.
And feeling like you're failing, right?
Yeah.
Which is where this whole comparison trap thing comes in. Like, the video gave this example. Imagine two skilled workers, both really good. One comes on a visa first, gets a feel for Canada, maybe does some odd jobs.
Okay.
The other, they come straight in as permanent residents. Who do you think is going to be happier a year later?
I'm guessing the first one, right?
Yeah.
Because their expectations are more realistic.
Bingo. They've already adjusted. They know it's tough. The other person, they might be picturing this perfect life, and when it doesn't line up.
It's a recipe for disappointment. So it's like a little bit of ignorance is bliss is actually helpful in this case.
In a way, yeah. Like the video argued, going through those early struggles, it kind of recalibrates your expectations.
Interesting. Because you're not constantly comparing yourself to some fantasy, right?
Exactly. The video even said that people who, really had to fight for their permanent residency, they often end up feeling way more grateful and satisfied.
Because they earned it. But then that makes me think, if happiness is so tied to our expectations, how do we even find it? In Canada, anywhere, are we always going to be comparing ourselves to something else? It's like, are we always chasing some moving target?
Oh, yeah.
If the goalposts keep shifting, can you ever really arrive?
Right, and the video actually talks about this, about taking ownership. Yeah, there are always going to be challenges, but it's about how you choose to respond.
Okay, so less about wishing things were different and more about, okay, this is where I am, now what?
Yeah, exactly. And one thing they stressed was community. Finding your people, that makes a world of difference.
Because if you're feeling isolated, dealing with all this stuff alone,
Yeah,
man, that's got to be so much harder.
totally. The video even told this story about this group of newcomers they met through a community garden, of all things, different backgrounds, different struggles.
But they found that shared experience.
Yeah, and it gave them the support system. It's like, even if your specific problems are different, just having people who get it, that's huge.
Makes you feel seen, right?
Totally. And the video really emphasized, like, don't limit yourself to just your own culture either. Embrace the whole multicultural thing Canada's got going on.
Because that's what's so cool about Canada, right? So many different perspectives, different ways of doing things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the other thing they talked about was this idea of like shifting your focus. Less about what you left behind and more about what you're building here.
So not, oh, back home things were like this, but more like, what can I make happen here?
Yes. It's all about that growth mindset, seeing challenges as like opportunities. They even use language learning as an example.
Which, I mean, that's a big one for a lot of newcomers, right?
Huge.
Yeah.
But also, once you start learning the language, new friends, new job opportunities, it opens up your world.
Totally. It's like this whole other level of connection becomes possible.
Exactly. And, you know, this all kind of leads to the video's big takeaway, that ultimately happiness, it has to come from within.
It's not about getting the perfect job, the big house, all that external stuff.
It's about finding that inner peace, that gratitude for what you do have.
So even if you're driving that taxi instead of, being a lawyer like you planned,
There's still joy to be found if you choose to see it.
it's about focusing on what you can control. Man, this has been eye-opening. So, to answer our big question, is everyone happy in Canada? I think, like you said earlier, it's complicated.
Definitely not a simple yes or no. It's about expectations, about resilience, about making the most of your situation.
About finding those bright spots, no matter what life throws at you. And honestly, I think that's a good lesson for all of us, eh? Whether we're new to a country or just trying to navigate, our own lives.
For sure. And hey, listener, while you're thinking about all this, the video focused a lot on jobs and money, but what about Canadian culture itself? How does that play into all of this? Something to think about.
Right. So much to unpack. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone. And until next time, happy exploring.